We will be perfect in every aspect of the game. You drop a pass, you run a mile. You miss a blocking assignment, you run a mile. You fumble the football, and I will break my foot off in your John Brown hind parts. And then you will run a mile. Perfection. Let's go to work.
High school sports have changed a lot over the last few years. Gone are the days of punishment workouts like what we just heard in this iconic speech from Remember the Titans. Coaches and trainers have to be aware of a lot of things while being on the field with their players, including extreme heat. Today's athletes are playing in record high heat, something many of their coaches and trainers didn't have to face during their athletic heydays. And although it might not feel like it today, there are plenty of hot and sunny days ahead in September. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we'll hear from coaches and trainers throughout the state and hear what they're doing to keep our players cool in extreme heat. Up first, Anya Panello, who's a Report for America Corp member reporting on environment and climate change for us here at Connecticut Public. She recently met up with some athletic trainers in Southeast Connecticut to learn how they're keeping kids safe during extreme heat. Here's her story.
5, 6, 7, push.
It's a hot summer day, and dozens of band students are out on the pitch at Norwich Free Academy, practicing their marching steps for the upcoming football season.
3, 4, 5.
It's the fourth heat wave of the summer, and even though it's still morning, it is starting to heat up.
So today is definitely going to be hotter. I think when I looked at the temps, we were close to up into 86.
KJ Donovan is the school's athletic trainer. It's her job to make sure student athletes stay safe from injury. And today, that means keeping an eye on the heat.
I've checked this twice since they've been out here.
She's watching the temperature with a small orange device called a Kestrel meter. It looks like an old brick phone, but it's a powerful tool. It can keep tabs on the humidity, dew point, and most importantly, how the heat is stressing the athletes. Right now, the device is in the red zone.
It limits your practice time to an hour, and then it's no conditioning, no running. It's pretty much just like a walkthrough, which is similar to what they're doing already.
But the meter's chirping means that stress measure is climbing to the highest possible risk level, the no-go black zone.
That means that we can't have any outside activity, so I'm about to kick them inside.
Donovan walks over to the other side of the pitch and tells the band director.
Is everybody listening?
Yes!
Excellent! Okay, we have been given the signal that it is too hot on the turf.
The students drink water, line up for popsicles,
Single file.
and head inside. Donovan gets bags of ice for a student who's feeling a little shaky from the heat, but ends up being fine.
We're not at the immersion stage. I just want to cool her off. That's all.
Earlier in the day, Donovan and trainers from other schools in Connecticut practice for scenarios that are much more difficult, like heat stroke. That's when the body's temperature reaches more than 104 degrees.
So hot, not good, not feeling great. So what we're going to do is, do we see sweat on her skin?
In a case like this, trainers will put the student in a tub filled with ice and water, or if they don't have that, a giant body bag will also do.
Assistant coaches, can we have the body bag and the water?
One of the trainers pretends to be a student who's unconscious. They roll her onto the body bag.
On the count of 3, we're going to roll. 1, 2, 3.
And dump 5 gallons of water over her.
Good.
These protocols are some of the ways schools are trying to keep students safe as temperatures rise from global warming. The last 2 years were the hottest on record in North America. And across the U.S., 9,000 student athletes a year are treated for heat-related illnesses, according to the Environmental Protection Agency.
There are caps to what is safe to be exercising in.
Rebecca Stearns is Chief Operating Officer at the Corey Stringer Institute at UConn, named after the professional football player who died from heat stroke in 2001.
There's going to be more days where we have to cancel practice or more days with greater modifications to those practices, unless we do something else.
That something else could be moving sports seasons later in the year or exercising inside. But for right now, the focus is on moving training times to avoid the midday sun and knowing what to do if something goes wrong, especially now when it's really hot outside and kids are just getting back from summer break.
We don't know what their current fitness is. They might not have been in a regular routine.
Back at Norwich Free Academy, Katie Cooper says she and the other athletic trainers gather each season so they know what to do ahead of time.
And that's why we do this and come up with the best scenarios that could work out.
That way, they're prepared for any what-ifs the heat throws at kids this summer. Anya Pinello, Connecticut Public Radio.
And joining us now in studio is Anya herself. Thank you so much for being with us, Anya.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was a really great story. You really took us with you in training. I can feel the heat really sweating here right now, and Anya can attest to that because it's really happening live. And also with us today is Rebecca Stearns. She's the Chief Operating Officer for the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut. Rebecca, appreciate your time as well.
Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Dr. Glenn Longarini, who's the Executive Director of the CASCIAC, which is the Connecticut Association of Schools, and the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference. Appreciate you being with us, Glenn.
Thank you, Catherine.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have a student athlete at home right now, or if you were an athlete yourself back in the day. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Anya, from what we just heard, it sounds like there's a lot of trainers and coaches who are taking heat stroke and heat-related illnesses really seriously. What did they tell you about preparing for these types of incidences?
Yeah, so they do take this very seriously. When it comes to heat stroke, you're basically boiling from the inside, and the body's not able to cool itself down, and that can cause organ failure and even death. And so the athletic trainers are the first in line to treat that before EMS even arrives. They need to cool the body down within like about 20 to 30 minutes. And so knowing what to do ahead of time and running through these practice scenarios is really important.
And what do we know about how common heat stroke is, especially since right now we're dealing with a lot of extreme temperatures?
Yeah. So it's hard to say how common heat stroke is unless someone dies from it, unfortunately. Right. We know from research from Rebecca Stearns that between 1982 and 2022, 67 student athletes have died from exertional heat stroke. So that's high school students, middle school students, and that's across the country. So that's an average of about 1 to 2 students per year.
And so we're seeing both trainers and coaches on the field right now keeping an eye on their players, but their roles are a little different. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, so the coach is focused on the game, the score, the strategy. The athletic trainer is a medical professional, and so it's their whole job to prevent injury from happening. And if something does happen, they're the ones there on the scene treating that player. Not all schools in Connecticut have an athletic trainer. So for those schools, it is up to the coach to do both of those things at the same time, which can be, more trickier.
Right. And because since we heard from your story just now, we were at a practice with you where you actually saw a practice scenario in action where a trainer pretended to be unconscious so the coaches could practice using a body bag. So how do these body bags work?
So basically, if the student is unconscious, they will roll the student onto the body bag. You fill it up with ice, water. You zip up the body bag up to their chin so that their face is not covered by the water. And then a group of people will get together and they rock the body bag back and forth. And that way the water and the ice is sort of moving all around the body bag, all around the student, cooling them down that way.
And it also sounds like there are some schools who have emerging tubs. Did you get to see what that looks like, and how does it work?
Yeah, so they're giant cold water immersion tubs. They can hold about 150 gallons of water, and it's basically the same process. You lower the student into the tub, fill it up with ice and water, and then some people will surround the tub, put their hands in the water, and sort of like make circular motions and move the water around that way.
And also a part of your story, you mentioned having access to a Kestrometer. So how do these meters work?
Yes. So it's a little device. It looks like an old brick phone or like a toy phone, but it costs like about $500, and it can measure like more than a dozen things at once: humidity percentage, dew point, heat stress. And so the trainers will put that out on the field on a tripod before practice starts to get a sense of like, what is the heat right now? And that tells them, okay, we can do practice as normal, or we can only be outside for up to an hour, or we're going to need to take more water breaks. And so the athletic trainer is monitoring that device throughout the entire practice and keeping the coach up to date.
And would you happen to know if that's something that's always been around? Is it recent? Is it common?
I think it's pretty recent, but I'll let the experts weigh in. They were not around when I was a kid.
Glenn, you want to hop in real quick on that?
I would say that the knowledge of it has been around for a while, but the insurance that our schools have, the the equipment that they need to be able to address the issues and the knowledge to be more preventive is probably within the last 5 years or so. Again, we're fortunate that Rebecca and Doug and her team are located right here in Connecticut. So it's been a great collaboration with KSI. And then through CAS and CIAC, we have worked with the NFHS to fund ensuring that all of our schools have the wet bulb globe thermometers and ensuring that all of our schools have those immersion tubs to address those safety issues.
Well, you read my mind. I'm going to ask Rebecca that question. But the reason why it came up in my brain is because I did grow up playing a lot of sports. I'm trying to remember if I've ever seen these devices, and I couldn't. So I figured I asked the question. And so, Rebecca, feel free to jump in on that too. But can you also talk about, how do these meters, or also known as, I think, wet bulb globe temperature thermometers, work, and how do they differ from other measurements like heat index?
Yeah, so these are great questions. And I would say in terms of the standards and best practices that we've established, those have come about in, I would say, like the last 15 years in terms of establishing that in the literature. But the WBGT is unique in that it actually has data-backed research to show that it's really effective at reducing heat illnesses. So if you put in some of these modifications that you just heard, we have found that you can reduce heat illnesses by up to 79% when you still have practice and you still have athletes on the field, but you're introducing these modifications. So the WBGT is helpful from the sense that it incorporates a lot more factors in terms of the environmental stress over and above what many people are familiar with, which is the heat index. So heat index accounts for the air temperature and also the humidity. But the WBGT also accounts for items like the wind speed and also how sunny it is or how cloudy it might be. And these are also very stressful items. So you can appreciate how much cooler and how much relief there is standing in the shade versus in full sun on a really hot day. And so it accounts for all those factors. And as I said, has been shown to be really effective at reducing heat illnesses.
Well, it's really amazing to see how many factors really factor into whether or not you can have practices or trainings on whatever day. And I think there's also another element called a Black Flag Day. So what qualifies as a Black Flag Day? Is it a day where no amount of practice is safe outside? What does it mean?
Yes, essentially there is a limit to what is safe for athletes to be participating in. And so that is what we refer to commonly as black flag conditions. And so that would be where we would not recommend any activity takes place. And typically those are, of course, going to be during the hottest parts of the day, which would be the middle of the day or early afternoon.
And Glenn, I know you gave us an idea earlier on whether or not the Kestrel measurement or the wet globe or wet bulb globes are available in school. So it does depend on the area, correct?
So all of our schools right now are they have a wet bulb globe thermometer. Okay. They all have a cold water immersion tub. That was a project that we worked with the KSI group and the Connecticut Association of Athletic Trainers to deliver those out as well. So it's a joint effort that we engaged in. We funded them, but worked with the protocols around that with KSI. We have instructional videos out, education videos out to our coaches, our athletic directors on the use of these. And, I think one of the important things too that, Rebecca's noting here too is that in Connecticut, it can vary from one part of the state to the other quite significantly. And I think there's even multiple heat zones in Connecticut as well. So to have a standard is very difficult because of how much variance there is in the state. So that's why having the tool, being able to know what the safety is and what the protocols are going to be on your fields is important here in Connecticut.
And Rebecca, I think approximately 9,000 high school athletes are treated for heat-related illnesses every year, and that's according to the EPA. And heat illnesses can get serious very fast. And something that's a little less common but more severe, and it does happen, is sudden cardiac arrest. Could you describe what happens here and how trainers respond to when something like this happens?
Yes. So there's a number of conditions that make up the common causes of sudden death in sport, right? And so sudden cardiac arrest is by far the number one cause of catastrophic death in athletes. Exertional heat stroke is in the top 3 as well. So that's why we focus on them and we talk about them. Amazingly, I won't go into detail, but amazingly, there's about 4 conditions that make up 90% of all the deaths we see. So because we see such concentration in those conditions, we really want to focus our efforts on those. So for sudden cardiac arrest, that's where you have an abnormality of the heart rhythm, and that can be due to different causes. It can be inherited or it could be an external cause. Simply being struck on the chest at the perfect wrong timing, unfortunately, can result in a cardiac arrest. So sudden cardiac arrest is deadly because it really has the shortest time span in which you have to act. So you have about 1 to 3 minutes, because every minute that passes is a reduction in the possibility of survival by about 10%. So if you think about that, after about 5 minutes, chance of survival drops to 50% if you don't have that intervention with CPR and the application of an AED. So that's a sudden cardiac arrest case. And compared to exertional heat stroke, because of that timeline, we do see a lot more fatalities related to it.
And Anya, because you've been following this story, was there anything that jumped out to you when you were reporting it, or anything that surprised you during your sort of journey here?
I mean, I guess I was just struck, athletic trainers, I did not have that growing up as a kid. And, just the fact that they are on the front lines, especially when it comes to heat stroke, there's not enough time to wait for EMS to come around, how seriously they take this. And just running through all these scenarios ahead of time and knowing exactly what they would do, who they would point to and ask for help, and really directing that whole scene.
Well, thank you so much for doing the story and for sharing it with us today.
Oh, thank you.
You've been listening to Anya Pinello, who's our Report for America Corps member, reporting on environment and climate change at Connecticut Public. Appreciate your time, Anya.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
And we'll be continuing this discussion on staying safe and cool this fall sporting season after a quick break. You've been listening to Rebecca Stearns, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut, and Dr. Glenn Longarini, who is the Executive Director of CAST CIAC, who will be staying with us. And if you participated in fall sports, or maybe you have an athlete in your household today, let us know. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Were you a high school athlete? What were those early days of conditioning like, when it's been a minute since you've practiced your sports for hours or daily? Well, gone are the days when we're running laps till someone gets sick, and part of that has to do with the heat. Extreme heat that sticks around through late summer into early fall means fewer practice days for today's K-12 athletes. And joining us now to talk more about it is Chris Myers. He's the Director of Athletics and Student Activities at Newington High School. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And still with us is Rebecca Stearns from UConn, and also Glenn Longarini with CAST CIAC. And so, Chris, to start off with you here, tell us a little bit about your background, because before you were a coach, you were an athlete as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, it gets longer and longer away. So I was an athlete 25, 30 years ago in high school, the days in Connecticut where I guess it wasn't as hot, but you still had plenty of your hot days.
Definitely.
So it's definitely changed. I did make my way down to Florida for a little bit to start my athletic director and professional career, and then made my way back to Connecticut. So I definitely had the feeling of the heat in Florida, and then there's definitely a transition as you move back to Connecticut for sure.
Well, I guess as we mentioned at the top of the hour and earlier too, like there has been some changes in terms of literal weather, temperatures, and also attitudes. So when you were an athlete to where we are today, how have you seen the way we think about high heat days and athletics change? Because it does seem like we're moving beyond sort of pushing through the pain.
Yeah, I think you're just more mindful. The information is more readily available. The CIC, Dr. Longarini, along with the Corey Stringer Institute and their support, have really made sure that student athletes, parents, coaches are provided with a wealth of knowledge. And I think that's really what's allowed us to evolve and change as we go. In today's atmosphere, every parent and kid is provided information before they register for a sport. Every coach is required to do their training each season just to provide that background. And athletic directors are responsible to make sure that those folks kind of understand where we, presently are at any given day. With the support of our training staff. And I think it's, as we evolve, it's just understanding more and more, how we should adjust and making sure we're communicating appropriately to all those involved.
And what have those conversations looked like? Have they been difficult conversations, or are people usually pretty understanding? Because I know coaches, of course, want their athletes to be the best that they can, but nobody, of course, wants to put these kids at risk. And I also imagine a lot of kids are probably inheriting the athletic legacies often.
Yeah, I mean, I think the information and the communication is really the key. Coaches have become much more acceptable to understand we want our kids to be performing at their highest level, and we also don't want to be responding to a negative situation. So, I'll speak for Newington. I mean, we start looking at things a week out, as we see temperatures potentially in riskful situations. We'll communicate to our coaches, hey, we may need to adjust. We may need to have a morning practice. We may need to move that into an evening where we go under the lights. And our coaches are very receptive to that because, again, they want to make sure that kids are able to perform at their highest level. You're not just sticking them out there at 2 o'clock in peak heat anymore. You want to make sure that those kids are safe, but they're also able to get the most out of their abilities.
I think we all grew up with do not go outside at 2 p.m. It's the hottest time of the day.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of openness for the adjustments.
Very much so. We've been very lucky. Our coaching staff is phenomenal at communicating along with our trainers. We've been lucky in Newington. Our Board of Education and our superintendent, Dr. Brummett, welcomed in bringing on a school-wide athletic trainer and having that individual as a resource to us to continually send out the morning text to our coaches saying, hey, you're clear to go, or hey, we're going to have a 15-minute intervals with water breaks consistently, or we're not going to be outside today, we're going to be inside. Those are things that occur all the time. And like I said, we start doing these things well in advance to make sure that our coaches do have a plan and make sure that they are able to communicate to our families and kids, hey, we have 2 practice sessions. We have one that could take place at 10 a.m. and then we have one that could take place at 7 p.m. And we'll make sure you're aware of that. But the ultimate goal of that is to ensure that your student athlete is safe.
One of the things that I've learned early with our collaborations with KSI, I remember being at a conference and listening to Dr. Costa and Stearns talk about heat illness being 100% preventable injury. And that is, one of the things that I think our coaches have really gravitated to as well. There's a lot of things that happen in sport that maybe you can't prevent, but this is something that we can take ownership of and we can prevent. So just understanding from a state association perspective, ensuring that we provide the resources to our schools to be able to handle those issues when they come up is an important thing. The resource we can't provide, which is probably one of the biggest resources that we've talked about earlier, is an athletic trainer. Right. Not every school has an athletic trainer, but the value that they bring to addressing these situations is unmatched. And so we'd love to see the role of the athletic trainer be something that is present in every school district.
Well, and Rebecca would love to respond to what we just heard from Glenn and Chris, because it sounds like across the Connecticut, coaches are thinking about how to protect their athletes and bring in more support services and hopefully more athletic trainers to help with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the conversation around athletic trainers because I'm an athletic trainer as well. Mm-hmm. And they are your first line of defense, and they're all the individuals who are trained in the prevention, recognition, and management of these injuries. So if you have an athletic trainer at your school, they are the ones who are going to be able to support all of the coaches, all of the athletes, and everybody else involved in sport to make sure that everything's happening in the safest way possible.
And I know this is something that we've kind of gone into detail a little bit earlier, Rebecca, but I wonder if we can just sort of expound more, or just to remind our listeners and myself, there is a difference between having just one coach and one athletic trainer. So can you talk about, why is it so important to have someone who is trained in that sense to sort of, I guess, help the coaches in their work?
Mm-hmm. Right. So athletic trainers, as you heard earlier, are medical professionals. And we don't expect, and nor should we be placing that burden on the coaches necessarily, right? So in in the cases where the schools do have the athletic trainers, that athletic trainer is going to ensure that when there is a catastrophic injury, the right steps are followed in the timeline that can ensure survival. So we just talked about sudden cardiac arrest, and having an AED and a trained professional there who can administer CPR is going to be the best lifeline that athlete has. And similar to an exertional heat stroke case, you have a little bit more time with exertional heat stroke care, but the reason why the standard dictates to treat on site is because, quite simply, if you wait for EMS to arrive, wait for the assessment to take place, wait for that transport to the hospital, then get to the hospital and have the setup, because they don't normally have something set up for exertional heat stroke care, get this setup ready, you're already past the window where you're going to ensure survival for that heat stroke victim. So that's really the key item that athletic trainers bring, is that activation of the emergency procedures and being able to do it on site with a medical professional there. And so that athletic trainer will ensure that the athlete has appropriate recognition. So they're going to use a accurate body temperature assessment, which is a rectal thermometer, and they're going to get that temperature, and they're going to start immediate cooling with cold water immersion. And they're going to ensure that that cooling and that treatment takes place before transport. And if you have those tenets of care and you ensure that each one of those happen, your survival rate can be as high as 100%. And that's the great thing, as Glenn alluded to earlier, is that we have a lot of data to show us that heat stroke is one of the very few catastrophic conditions where we can almost ensure survivability if you have all of these items in place.
Well, and actually, just to build on that a little bit more, because we've been talking about scenarios where something is happening, so you have the expertise and the supplies to work on that when it's happening. But Glenn also mentioned earlier how it's absolutely preventable. So can you talk about what prevention looks like in terms of when we're talking about heat stroke here?
Yeah, when I talk about heat stroke, I like to break it up into preventing the episode itself and also the treatment of the exertional heat stroke. And so I think the data really supports and is very strong behind being able to save anyone who has an exertional heat stroke. So now I can't guarantee that happens in every scenario, but what we do know is that if you can recognize the exertional heat stroke early, meaning you recognize it at the onset, you have an accurate body temperature assessment so that you can confirm that it's over 104 and it's not some other condition, because it can look like many other conditions. And then you have a cold water immersion tub to treat that individual on site, and you ensure that that treatment is completed before you transport them through EMS. And so those are really the main tenets of survival, I would say. But we have so many great tools, as you said, that we can do to prevent it in the first place. Right. I alluded to that when we have WBGT monitors on site, that we can reduce exertional heat illnesses by up to 79%. So we're wiping out a vast majority of them to begin with. So we don't have to go to the point of calling EMS and treating them on site and having an emergency. We also have great success with something called heat acclimatization, which is simply slowly introducing exercise in the heat at the onset of a sports season. And that has shown that you can reduce heat illnesses by up to 55%. So these two tools, specifically heat acclimatization and modifications based on WBGT, are highly successful at reducing instances. And then if they do occur, because of course there's many factors that go into this, we can have 100% survival if we ensure those tenets of care, as I said earlier, with cold water immersion and treating on site prior to transport.
Well, and Chris, I think I see you nodding as Rebecca was talking about this. You know, when we're talking about preventions and modifications to make sure that every athlete is safe on the field, how does this vary by sport?
Well, you know, I mean, we've made a lot of progress. You know, the CIC has done a great job of leading us in the right direction. You know, last year we began offering the opportunity to have some summer workouts and training. So when you talk about acclimatization, I mean, these are things that, well, now we have kids where we're allowed to have 2 times a week, 2 hours, and where we have those kids coming in participating within that heat. So they do stay readily available instead of just getting them after a 3-month layoff and then having to gauge where they are. So it is a much better way to just make sure that we're maintaining activity and keeping them, you know, readily available for that. You know, at Newington, we've also had an opportunity. We run through just some practice sessions. So, you know, one of the key things is making sure that not only our coaches and our trainer has an AED with them, but making sure the kids know where the AED is in the school. You know, they're a great way to We just kind of go on a little field trip. We talk about how we're going to respond, who's going to be there. And, those little things cut down seconds, maybe minutes, which could be life-saving, time and opportunity. And again, when you talk about going to different sports, recognizing where your facility is. We have at Newington, we have some that are on site and some that are off site. So recognizing how we're going to respond to an emergency in those particular times is very difficult. So making sure that those coaches and that staff, but along with the kids, also know, hey, these are the things that we're going to need to do if there is an emergency at this time. And again, all the knowledge, training, communication is really ultimately the key to success if we are faced with those situations.
One of the other pieces over the last couple of years as well, KSI, CATA, the Connecticut Association of Athletic Directors, and CIAC have worked with legislators to put some legislation in place that require emergency action plans to be written for our venues, to inform parents about heat illness, heat acclimatization, cardiac arrest, and make sure that education is reaching our student athletes and our parents. So our schools are required to have AEDs. So, it's a nice combination here in the state as well, where we have supportive legislators that are working with our association and organizations to ensure that our schools and our school buildings have the resources that individuals need to be able to respond and react to these, which I think really sets education-based athletics apart from other club and AAU type activities where perhaps those fields don't have that same level of expectation.
And so we've been talking a lot about, or we're getting into more how every athlete is different. And ahead of this hour, we spoke with Dr. Carissa Niehoff, who's a Chief Executive Officer of the National Federation of State High School Associations. And here's what she had to say about being mindful about this.
Body type, body size, level of conditioning, of course, but also positions on the field or on the court. What type of position is the student athlete playing? And I'll go right to football. We actually have data that indicates that heat illness is a greater factor in offensive and defensive linemen. They tend to be larger body sizes. They tend to be in contact every single play with an opponent. It's high level exertion in terms of physical muscle use. And there's not a lot of downtime in between plays for these kids. The science has said these kids are more at risk for heat illness than perhaps some of their teammates. So we absolutely have to talk about body size. Trainers and medical professionals have a good way of measuring body conditioning, whether it's heart rate and breathing at rest, whether it's body fat measurements, so BMI measurements. We have to pay attention to that.
So, Chris, we've been talking about in many ways, this is clearly not a one-size-fits-all, as we have just heard. How do you make adjustments for each athlete while holding everyone to a high standard?
Well, I think it's different standards, depending on the time of year. I mean, we have obviously our conditioning days for football-wise, right? We have set time where we start preparing our student athletes, for those conditioning days and taking into account all those different positions, right? Your wide receivers usually a little lighter, usually a little, more quick on their feet. And then obviously you go into your linemen. So these are all things that positional coaches, head coaches take into account as you're navigating through those conditioning days, as you're getting those student athletes prepared. And, I think we're at a point now where, we have conditioning sessions all summer, so those kids, when they're available, they're in the weight room, they are doing a little cardio, so they're better prepared than, when you say back in my day, I guess, when
Right.
kids would show up after a long summer
Right.
of hanging out, and then you just get into it. We really do. We were very mindful of who's been there all summer, who's been there, on a regular basis, and what student athletes we might not be sure of. So we need to make sure we're gauging where they are in their return to play.
The other thing Chris does real well is to take away that stereotype that the tough athlete, the tough kids don't talk about when they're not feeling well or when they may be injured. That, we encourage kids to speak up. Let the trainer know. Let the coach know what you're feeling and how you're feeling. It's not a sign of weakness. To do that, we'd rather have those athletes be feeling well and be at their best to be able to perform than to not let coaches know or trainers know that they're not feeling their best and be able to address that issue to get them back to peak performance. So, Chris and our athletic directors have done a tremendous job in the last few years of really taking away that stereotype and getting our kids to communicate more what they're feeling.
And Rebecca, writing on pretty much what Chris and Glenn have been sharing, it does seem like a lot of coaches have moved past the sort of play through the pain type of mindset. But is that shift still happening as we continue to learn about how serious heat-related injuries really can be?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen the shift. It still has room to go, I would say. Depends on where you look. But I think it's a really important shift because as we were hearing earlier a little bit too from Glenn and Chris, that coaches and other staff outside of the athletic trainer and the medical professionals are hugely important in this conversation. And sometimes, even if you do have an athletic trainer, they might not be at every single practice or for every single sport. So you're relying on all of these other individuals on the field to make these smart choices, right? So to be educated, have some education on catastrophic injuries, to know their athletes. They know their athletes better than anybody else, to identify when something looks off or something's going wrong and be able to execute that emergency action plan and get that emergency care to them quickly. So I do think there's been a big shift in recent years. I certainly want to see more because we're still seeing the deaths happen. Right. But I think these are great examples of where schools can be successful and how there are definite examples of how we can do this very successfully.
Well, and Chris, I wonder too if this perhaps it's part of prevention is you start a relationship with your students, you get to know them, so you learn how to read their literal body language, right? Because I think we've been talking a lot about sort of more top down, where athletic trainers or coaches have a better understanding of the environment, of if you're not feeling well, don't do the thing. But I often wonder if sometimes students feel like they need to, maybe perhaps the environment that they grew up in, like, let's just push through it. Let's just push through this. I can do it, blah, blah, blah. How do you help kids feel comfortable that it's okay to not do it today? You can do it tomorrow, or maybe even just to advocate for themselves when they need to?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's relationship building. And I think, the core precedent of athletics is building relationships with your student athletes. We talk about the mental wellness of our student athletes. Well, guess what? That starts with that relationship that you have with your coach. It starts with the relationship you have with your assistant coaches and other teammates. So with that, when you feel more comfortable communicating and you're able to be more honest and upfront, that's when a student athlete can make a coach aware. Hey, I'm not at my perfect right now. Something doesn't just feel right. I might need to take myself and step away. And, our coaches are obviously understanding that if that's something that the student athlete is willing to communicate to us, we need to make sure we're taking this very seriously. And we're going to address that situation, as we go. But again, trying to find the optimal time and keep them out of those situations is another key situation. It's that planning, it's that front end communication is really, really beneficial for our student athletes and our coaches as well. Right. And the trainers are going to be leading that. They're going to be guidance.
And I was going to say, Glenn, flipping it too, as a parent or a student, if you have a coach who's still in that mentality of playing through the pain, how do you have a conversation with them and respond to what Chris said?
Yeah, difficult conversations are part of the job as administrators, whether it's athletic directors, principals. It's what we're doing. And the, high school sports and education-based athletics is an extension of the school curriculum. It's a very different environment. Only 6% of our athletes are going on to play at the next level. So other ways that we can work with kids and understanding the culture of what we're trying to build in high school sports is within the curriculum itself. So within physical education classes, health classes, wellness classes, where, again, we're continuing to educate all kids about understanding their bodies, knowing warning signs, being able to be at your peak, and then carrying those lessons through to what we're doing in education-based athletics on our school sport fields. That helps that culture shift as well, that it's not just something that they're hearing outside, and giving the kids the tools that they need to be able to articulate and talk to that coach, even if you have that old school coach that wants you to push through, but being able to prepare our kids with the tools that they need to be able to articulate what they're feeling, what their bodies need. Again, the coach wants them to perform at their best. Right. That's going to give the best chance to be competitive. So having the kids and having that avenue for them to be able to have that meaningful relationship and talk to the coach, I think that is what's going to help bring that shift, as Rebecca said, to where it needs to be. It's begun, but it's not even close to where we need those relationships to be. So we have to keep working at that.
I feel like this is all advice that we can take beyond the sports field today. So we're all taking notes here behind the scenes. Our guests will stay with us after the break. You've been listening to Glenn Longarini with the Cass CIAC, Rebecca Stearns from UConn, and Chris Myers from Newington High School. Today, we're talking about the upcoming fall sports season. Let us know if you're training for football, soccer, or track right now, or if you're a coach, or if you have an athlete in your household. Love to hear from you. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. It's one of the most important things you can do to prevent heat stroke, especially when you're participating in sports. But as we've learned this hour, there's a lot more to it than just drinking water. Still with us is Rebecca Stearns from UConn, Chris Myers from Newington High School, and Glenn Longarini from Cass CIAC. Rebecca, I want to jump with you here since we're just talking about hydration, but we've also been talking a lot about high school sports. But what about younger kids? Are they also susceptible to heat-related illnesses because they're also out and about a lot in school?
Yes. Yeah, and that's true. Younger kids, and typically when we talk about this, we're talking about high school or college-aged athletes, right? And so certainly middle school and younger in organized different sports are at risk as well. We don't see it quite as often in those younger ages, but we see that the top causes are pretty consistent in terms of the same things that are plaguing our high school and college athletes are definitely prevalent in those age groups too.
Glenn, what are your thoughts on that, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I have some young kids myself, and so it just brings me to some of the baseball and softball fields, and one of our coaches we work with a lot, Paul Singley, who's a high school teacher and coach and former reporter. And again, it comes back to that education. So in the youth programs that I've worked in, they require that there's conversations that are taking place. Some of them require first aid, CPR training, and others. So again, it's not the level of that athletic trainer, but at least it's at the first responder level. So being aware as a youth coach of where's my closest AED? What are the numbers that I have to call? So I think if we could move those expectations that we have of emergency action plans at our school facilities, and we could bring those out into park and rec facilities and have that available so anybody at that site can have a list to know, here are the numbers, here are the locations. It's one more step that we can take to address that younger population.
Well, and we've been talking a lot about how our athletes today are dealing with a lot more extreme weather compared to, back in the day, as we kind of laugh about it, that we didn't really have to deal with that, even though, of course, there are hotter days as well. But now we're also seeing more poor air quality days. So is that something that also impacts athletics and practice these days?
Well, yeah, you mentioned that. We came through COVID and we finally got back to play, and we're so excited. And we get to the spring, and great, these are going to be our first really outdoor activities. We're not worried about this. And then Canadian fires bring smoke down into Connecticut, and we're postponing track events and lacrosse games because of smoke. So the ability to get hit with something that we've never experienced before continues to happen, as we move on and environment changes. So it has made us more aware of looking at those things and talking with our ADs, our sport medicine advisory committees, on what is safe to go out and participate when those warnings occur.
Yeah, the CIC does a great job when we have those situations to communicate out what we should be looking for, and ultimately, you're pivoting a lot. I think it's probably one of the things that folks don't notice about your high school coaches as much. They're adjusting to many things on the fly. So for that particular time, we were doing a lot of indoor practice. At that juncture, your baseball teams might have been hitting in indoor cages at June when it was beautiful out, just because the air quality wasn't acceptable. So you do have to just respond to the factors that are in your environment, do your best to maximize your potential, and move on from there.
Well, in the years after the pandemic, interest in sports was waning, but that's starting to turn around, it looks like. Here's what Dr. Carissa Niehoff has to say. She's from the National Federation of State High School Associations, told us about participation in athletics.
Last year, for the first time, we were up above pre-pandemic levels. And in fact, this past year, we're higher than last year. We also do research with student athletes to dig into why they might not choose to participate, or why they were participating perhaps in middle school and have chosen to drop. And what we're finding is that across the board for generations, the number one reason kids discontinue participation in sports is that it's not fun, and or right up there is too much pressure. So we're finding that kids still want to play for fun, to be with their friends, for competition. And the reason they discontinue is if those desires aren't met.
And so, Chris, can you respond to what we just heard here? And I think, as Glenn mentioned earlier, this is supposed to be an extension of your education. It's supposed to be fun. That's what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, listen, it's life lessons. Education-based athletics is the greatest opportunity you're going to have as you navigate the high school years, because it's going to give you real world, real life, success and failure. Oftentimes, the lessons you learn from failure are much greater than that you learn from success. So, we continue to try to support our student athletes in managing that and understanding that. And I think sometimes you get caught up in the winning is the ultimate goal. And your coaches that truly are successful and that truly understand what we're doing recognize that, hey, with failure, you can teach more lessons at times. And I think that's something critical when you start talking about, student athletes going out and having fun. That's a critical piece to it, and challenging themselves and trying to get the most out of their abilities. Those are all pieces that are going to allow students to continue to swarm back, to high school athletics, and make sure we're maintaining that.
Well, it makes me feel so much better about myself that those high school shin splints mean more than just the physical injury. Rebecca, any responses to just having fun in sports? Got about 30 seconds here.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important. As Chris was saying, life lessons. I think there's a ton of data to support the value of high school sports here and what that impact does on an overall health, mental health, and just lifelong success. So, of course, we want to be able to host those and have them, and of course, doing it in a safe way, which is what I always get back to. So I think, Connecticut is uniquely positioned in that we didn't quite get to this, but there's so many other things just outside of some of the items we talked about that make Connecticut, kind of exceptional in what it's doing. And that involves also the EMS policies that we have in our state, the education that we have for our coaches, as well as the policies and access to equipment. So overall, yes, 100% agree with everything.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Rebecca Stearns, who's with UConn. Rebecca, appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
You're also listening to Chris Myers, who is the Director of Athletics and Student Activities at Newington High School. Chris, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And also Glenn Longarini, who is with CAS CIAC. Glenn, thanks for being on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And just before we go, a quick note to our book-loving listeners. We're launching a new community series called Where We Read, and we would love to see you at the launch. Join me and the Where We Live team on September 6th at Rebel Dog Coffee Co. in East Hartford. No assigned reading, no pressure, just a relaxed conversation among book lovers. We would love to know what you're reading. So find out more at ctpublic.org/whereweread. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening. And be safe if you're playing sports out there.
You wish that summer could always be